Hello, good day all, and namaskar. In continuation of our this video series about ISO 27001 2022 current changes, we are talking and covering the 11 new control which has been introduced in this standard, and some of the controls we have already covered. You can refer my previous YouTube videos. Today we are going to talk about A 8.11 data masking. So let's first understand what this control uh, is all about, and at high level what this control mean is. So this control require you to use data masking together with access control in order to limit the exposure of sensitive information, right? What it says further, this primarily means personal data because they are heavily regulated through privacy regulation, but it could also include other categories of sensitive data. So just to understand, when it say primarily it is for personal data. So once you are processing as a data controller or processor this personal data in your organization, you have to see that this personal data is bound to have legal and regulatory requirement. Like if you see GDPR, CCPA, you have PIPDA in Canada, and you have Australian Privacy Act, and you have other country specific this laws and regulation related to personal data. Once you have this personal data, they have mentioned this explicit or requirement which need to be taken care, and this is considered as a sensitive information. So as per law and this as per regulation of different regulation, this personal data which is considered as sensitive information, and there are different category of sensitive information as per different regulation. You have to see that if when companies are processing this information, they have proper masking in place, and once they have proper masking with the access control, right? So we'll understand what this masking and access control, why it is needed. So this is about personal data. Now it also says that it is not limited to personal data, it can also include other categories of sensitive data. So for example, if your organization is not dealing with personal data, but you may have some other categories of sensitive data which may not be lying in, for example, sensitive data, but your organization categorize this data as a sensitive data. You can have this data mask and also have a proper access control, right? All this together. So what masking and access control? So for example, if let's suppose if I'm just to understand, I'm an HR head, and there is one guy who is HR executive, right? So for as a rule, and then this HR head have access of so many items in organization like salary slip, uh, contracts, access of access to of tools where this salary information are being processed. Now HR executive is also may have some of the information, but it is limited to this not extent that what HR had, right? So this is not needed for HR executive to have this information in such a full manner which is available to HR head. So there are two things. One, HR head, for example, X person as HR head, and then he is try to access this portal where the salary slip are being accessible or stored or processed. Then he has to make proper authentication. He is proper authenticated, right? And once he is authenticated that okay, he can access this payroll portal, then by putting user ID, password, multi-factor authentication, MFA. Once this person is authenticated with his credential, user ID and password, then he has to authorize to see the level of information for which he is authorized to see. So, for example, let us suppose payroll slip, right. So, this both people may have access to payroll portal access, but HR head may have access to see all the payroll detail of particular employee. So, he is authorized to see this, but HR executive is not authorized to see payroll of each and every employee. So, he is only able to see some of the basic detail like PAN card, may be possible, just for example, PAN card or some basic details of employee ID or employee number, joining date, last salary is being processed or not, just to understand, right. So, he can have access. So, he is authorized to only access this information. So, proper authentication, and then he has to has, once the common information is available, then he is authorized that what information this particular HR head and HR executive is authorized to see. Now, let us suppose, for example, once this person is taking query of any employee to see that he may have some issue. So, he may not be needed this PAN card full number, and he may need to identify this user, that is the authenticate employee who is asking query. May be possible you can have this mask information on only this last two, just for random, this last 4 digit is available to verify this employee along with other identification, right. So, one is access control. So, you have proper access control with the authentication and authorization, and then you have proper masking. So, if data is masked in such a way, so masking is just to understand hiding or hiding, not hiding the data. So, data is hide as per the role, which minimum information, by which minimum information person can fulfill his job role, and this is very important to save the critical and sensitive information to be disclosed by those unauthorized people or the employees or the outside outside of outside of people, those who are trying to unauthorized way to access this information. Okay. So, this is masking and access control. Now, understand how to take care in and what technological changes the organization has to do in their organization to meet this requirement. Companies can use tool for pseudonymization, and just a moment. So, company can use tool for pseudonymization and anonymization in order to mask data if this is required by privacy or other regulation. Either method or other method like encryption or obfuscation can also be used. So, what it says, like pseudonymization and anonymization. I will cover in this two topics in next slide, because this is at high level, because this is something we have to understand. But what it says, like GDPR mentioned that the company has to use this pseudonymization, right. So, the purpose here is based on the regulation, applicability as per data processing of the data subject individuals of particular country, data subject for particular country, you have to see that what data, if any data masking or any such requirement, it is not related to data this masking, this particular control or any control which is being introduced or any previous control. If any specific requirement are mentioned in this regulation, that you have to have follow. So, in GDPR, pseudonymization is one of the requirement, and also anonymization is also not discussed, but anonymization is not, once anonymized data is there, the GDPR is not applicable to that anonymized data, right. So, this is important to understand, right. So, you have to use pseudonymization, and then once you have anonymization in place for your data, GDPR is not applicable. In pseudonymization case, GDPR is applicable, and you have to have proper security and this all privacy control in place to secure this data. Now, if any regulation specific requirement is not there, you may use any other data masking techniques like encryption, right. So, we will not talk about what encryption is all about. So, encryption is something you have plain text, and you through encryption engine and encryption key, you do it as in ciphertext, right. So, ciphertext is only can be converted into plain text when somebody have a key, right. So, key is a very critical in encryption, and also you can have obfuscation, right. So, obfuscation is something is data hiding techniques, right. So, itself data hiding techniques, you can use different techniques which are there to hide your data, and only available with the role who is authorized to see or process that data, to see and process this data. Okay. Now, once we have this technological control, in ISO 27001 there is no such mandatory requirement to have a documented procedure for this control, but it is suggested because this is a new control, and in our previous videos also we have mentioned that we are tracking that it is always good to have some setup of processes that will determine which data need to be masked and who can access which type of data and which method will be used to mask the data, right. So, you, because this is a new control, it is very important that you have a process in place where you can define the sensitive data, and then if any regulation specific need is there, or your own organization based on the risk assessment of this sensitive data, based on risk assessment, you define that who can access, right, and which method for masking need to be used. So, this is very important because if you have seen already that in finance industry, financial and some other confidential like health industry where this HIPAA is applicable, health industry, or I'm sure in financial like where this is very sensitive and very confidential information are being processed, it has already been implemented, but in manufacturing or somewhere with IT, those who are not involved into finance or healthcare, it may a new item. So, organization those who are not already doing this or aware about this data masking and the process and that how to take care, they have to give extra cautiousness to implement this control. Now, once you have this everything process and you know how to take it through technology, again it is very important that you train people on this aspect. So, make employee aware why masking data is important and train them on which data need to be masked and how. And again, please see that your organization, if not dealing with any any information which is sometime it is not very critical or sensitive, or you are not aware about regulation which where you are operating, please start looking into those and then start implementing and start training your employees on this aspect, because once regulation like GDPR is involved, you have to have ensured that your people are trained and the proper processes are into place to make ensure that you have a proper organization level and technological control in place to meet this regulation requirement. Okay. Now, what documentation you can have at high level? You can have information classification policy, determine which data are sensitive and what categories of data need to be masked. It is as simple as that. Access control policy define who can access, right, and secure development policy. So, this is important to understand. Define the technology of masking the data. Larger companies or companies that need to be compliant with the European Union General Data Protection Regulation and similar privacy regulations should have the following documents: privacy policy, personal data protection policy, anonymization, pseudonymization policy, right. So, what we can have that we may already have information classification. So, we can have update or we can create where we can define the sensitive, how the sensitive, which data is sensitive, right. And we can have our access control policy already in place. We can update or we can have thus if we are implementing first time, we can have access control policy, and then we can define that who is authorized and what to access what information and up to what extent, right. And if you are in software development, right, and you are developing application for European Union, and you are falling under GDPR, you have to have secure development practices. So, you have to have either, if you don't have already the secure development the process in place or practices in place, you have to have create, or either if you have already, you have to see that it are meeting the criteria to meet this data masking control. And then you can have as per GDPR privacy policy, for example, and then as mentioned here, this pseudonymization and anonymization process, right, and what the basic definition, how it should be done, and what how it should be taken or implemented or taken care by the employees in organization. Okay. Now, once we have this high level understanding about data masking, let's move to the next slide just to understand pseudonymization in better or little more structured way. So, so what is statutory pseudonymization? What it says that pseudonymization is a standard in the GDPR that need to be met if you want to process personal data and use it in line with the GDPR requirement. So, pseudonymization is one of the requirement under GDPR, okay, and you have to meet this requirement if you are processing personal data. This is very important. So according to Article 4 GDPR, we are not going in detail. Let understand what pseudonymization mean. So what it means that processing or personal data in such a manner that the personal data can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject, individual person who can be identified without the use of additional information, provided that such additional information is kept separately and is subject to technical and organization measure to ensure that the personal data are not attributed to identified or a identified natural person. Okay. And it is important to note that under the General Data Protection Regulation, pseudonymized data is still considered personal data. So, this is very important. Once you have this pseudonymized data, right. So, GDPR requirement are still applicable on this data, and you have to have this organization and technical measurement in place to ensure that this data is secure, right. And you should comply. Now, what it says further, that you should still comply with all GDPR requirement, personal data protection, purpose limitation, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality. And if you want to process data for analytics purpose, data anonymization can also be used to safeguard personal data privacy and drive insight from it. So this is also very important, and those companies, those who are doing and using processing data for analytics purpose, data anonymization is one of the available solution which can meet the GDPR requirement to safeguard the personal data privacy and drive insight from it, right. So let understand this pictorial way what this. So for example, this is a personal data where name, birth, email and medical data is mentioned, right. What pseudonymized data is, if you see clearly, this personal data name is name is removed and some anonymized token number or code number, serial number is given. Now birth is also where this anonymized or sorry this pseudo number is given, right. And then you have this email where this email is masked, right. So this is one of the example of pseudonymized data. So what it says, pseudonymization again what it says, that if you are processing personal data in such a manner in pseudonymization, that personal data cannot longer be personal data जो भी है personal data cannot longer be identify this person attributed to no longer be attributed to a specific data subject. So when I say data subject, it is individual person can, through this personal information, this data subject cannot be identified, right, without the use of any additional information, provided that additional information is kept separately. And this additional information, which if I mix up with this, add this with this information and I can identify, this additional information should be, if it is with organization, should be kept separately in secure, or if it is in organization control. Okay. So this is a pseudonymization at high level. So so just this is high level understanding, and please this is not a legal suggestion from my side, and this is a disclaimer. This is for only education purpose, and if you want to use pseudonymization or anonymization as per the GDPR or any regulation, please consult your legal authorities and take a legal advice. Okay. Now let's understand what data anonymization is. This is also important to understand if we are meeting this control. So what is data anonymization? In contrast to pseudonymization, data anonymization is the process of irreversible transformation of personal data. The goal of anonymizing data is not only to remove personal identifier, but also to ensure that it is impossible to determine who an individual is from the rest of the data, and for this purpose to be permanent. So this is very important. Once you have this anonymization in place, and once you have this anonymized data, what it says that in pseudonymization, the data, personal data, right, which you have pseudonymized, right. So you can identify, there is a way which with additional data you can identify this original person to whom this personal data belong to, original person to whom this data belong to in pseudonymization case, right. Now what anonymization says, it is a one step ahead than pseudonymization. What it says, that once you anonymize data, this data, and you anonymize data for this, this is a person, right, and this is data belong to this, personal data belong to this person, right. And once you anonymized this data, so this is now this for this is the data. Now, with this anonymized data, you cannot identify this data subject or person with this data. Okay. So, this is irreversible mechanism. Okay. And this is as per the recital 26 EU GDPR, and the principle of data protection should therefore not apply. This is very important to anonymous information. Once you have this anonymous information, GDPR is not applicable. The information does not relate to identify natural person or to personal data rendered anonymous in such a manner that the data subject is no longer identifiable, right. So, once you have anonymous data, it is mentioned it is not a personal data and GDPR requirement is not applicable. But to be honest, if as per my understanding and my best possible, it is still, because anonymization is a little typical process and for the organization, and so it is still better to have proper security control in place for the anonymization data, even if you understand that okay, my data is anonymized and the GDPR requirement is not applicable, right. So, if I am not wrong. Now, let us understand in this simple way what anonymized data. So, for example, this is personal and this is a personal data of this person. This is name, this is birth, this is email and medical. Now, what we do, we aggregate, anonymization, there are separate technique like aggregation, generalization, swapping, right. And so, what you do, you have lot of personal data, and then what you do, you anonymize data, you aggregate, and then says sex is female and age is you just defined a range, and then you can have this medical data, that is migraine, right. So, once you have this aggregated data where you have two data, just personal data. So, when I say personal data is sex, so you say it is male, and age is, let us suppose if you have data from 25 to 30 or 40 years of age, right. This is personal data in one bucket, and you can have health data, category 1 migraine, category 2 some other disease, right. So, this is separated from this personal data, and you have this personal data and aggregated personal data and health data. And so, it is very difficult for anybody to by utilizing these two data and then identify this person from this information. This is called anonymization. And to be honest with you, this pseudonymization and anonymization is a little complex subject. Those who are just going through this or going to start this or implementing, or I believe even of those who are already doing it, it is it's still a complex area where we have to keep learning. Okay, and in last, quickly, once you have personal identifiable data, so we have pseudonymized data, what we have discussed, and one step further is the anonymized data. Okay, so truly anonymized data from which you cannot, it is a reversible process again, you cannot identify with this set of data of to a personal person. And pseudonymized, what is with the pseudonymized data, you can identify personal data, it is a reversible process. So, that is there, right. And de-identified data, this pseudonymization is one of the way through which you do de-identification of data. Okay. So, I hope now you have some clarity about this control, how to implement this control. I've tried my best to simplify this control and how you can implement, and just to give this simple explanation of pseudonymization and data anonymization. I will try to make one more video for this pseudonymization and anonymization, where we can see with example what these two data masking techniques are, and I hope now you have a fair understanding. Thanks for your time, and again I am making this disclaimer, this is for only education purpose, this is not legal binding. If you want to understand how these techniques are going to work, please understand from your technical team, or take your legal expertise suggestion and guidance. Thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day.